Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Reference Point. I'm the host, Dave Cokerhook, and I'm pleased to let you know that we've got a return visitor to the show tonight, Mr. John Renesch, who's been on the show about 5 or 6 months ago, I think. And at that point we were talking about how some of the social structures in economics and politics and education and a number of other areas don't seem to be meshing so well anymore, and what might we be able to do about that. John is an author, he's a business philosopher, he's a futurist, and we talked some about his book last time, Getting to the Better Future, and I wanted to dig into that some more. So I asked him if he'd be willing to come back and visit with us again and have us dig in a little bit more into some of the philosophies. So John, thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure to have you back on Reference Point.
Happy to be here, Dave. Happy to be here.
So why don't we just dive back into this? And I think the way to do this is to sort of set the stage again. I mean, it's been a while since this particular subject matter was on the show, so I think maybe you could start at the beginning as you see it. What are the circumstances that we are in right now as a society, and then we can kind of take a look at what might we need to do in order to make things better.
Mm-hmm. The second part's going to take longer to answer than the first part. Where we are right now is, in my view, and in a lot of other people's view, is most of our systems, most of our institutions, most of the organizations we've created are in some stage of dysfunction. Some might even say they're working against the common good. So that is they were intended to produce a certain result for humanity. They were intended to serve us. Mm-hmm. And sooner or later, more and more of us are finding ourselves being a servant to the organizations that we created. So to some degree, we're becoming slaves of those institutions. So there's a dysfunctionality organization-wise going on. But what is allowing that largely to happen is that we have a more and more exaggerated adolescent society, and the whole world is still in the stage of adolescent. We're a very young species, human mm-hmm. beings. And what I'm started to address in that book, and will be addressing much more in my new book, is that it's time for us to consciously evolve into a full adult mentality and start treating each other and our planet as responsible adults rather than pesty adolescents.
But you said consciously evolve, which sounds like that is not the typical mechanism for a species of any kind to grow, to mature, to become other than it.
Yeah, but human beings have the ability to choose. You know, rocks, I'm not sure, have that ability, or
not that I know
roaches or jackrabbits. But we have the ability to make that choice to grow up. And we all know what it was like to go through adolescence. Some of us are still in adolescence. We don't have any choice when it comes to our physical selves. We mm-hmm. mature whether we like it or not. But a lot of us don't mature spiritually or emotionally or even intellectually. We kind of stay as a kid. A lot of people do that. And as a society, in fact, the United States as a culture is a fairly adolescent society. It's also a very young country. It's one mm-hmm. of the youngest in the world. So we have a 250-year-old country that's got a lot of toys and a lot of power and a lot of money, but we're still in a lot of ways acting like adolescents. By that I mean short-term thinking. We hang out with our cliques, our little groups. We have a lot of attention on immediate gratification, getting our needs met right now, mm-hmm. in a hurry for that. All of those are kind of adolescent qualities, and we need to do more long-range thinking, come up with ways to work together collaboratively with not only ourselves in this country, but with the rest of the world.
That implies that as individuals, that it's not the sort of thing that you can put out and say, wouldn't it be nice if, and all of a sudden the magic wand comes and boom, everybody's
right.
had their consciousness raised to that level. People are going to have to recognize that there is this concern and there are these problems, and they're going to have to make a choice. As you said, choice was an operative word, I think. They're going to have to make a choice to grow or to move in a different direction. How do we get there? How do we facilitate choice?
Each individual has to make that choice for themselves. So what we can do is get enough information in front of them. I'm writing some books. Other people do other things, movies. But we have ways of getting people to see that we are an adolescent society and that we can grow up, but each person has to make that choice themselves. And at some point there'll be enough people, and it's happening, it is happening, it's just not reported in the press or the media. But a lot more people are a lot more aware than they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago and so forth. They're working on themselves, they're developing themselves in terms of emotional intelligence and emotional maturity. So as more and more people get to that place of seeing that they need to grow up, and they take a different perspective on the world. They look at the world as more of an adult than an adolescent. And as more and more people start to come to that, it'll become more in vogue, so to speak. It'll become less and less acceptable that we can act like adolescents. Right now it's perfectly acceptable to act like adolescents. We can even have our leaders act like adolescents, and we say, oh, isn't that cute?
And it seems that it tends to be, as you were mentioning that, I had a thought, but if we're going to grow into that other dimension, that is looking at more of a global perspective. I mean, in your book, you referred to the term spaceship Earth, which I know you didn't originate, but
Buckminster Fuller.
But the idea behind that is, look, we're actually all in this together, and we need to recognize that we're in this together and start doing certain things in common rather than in opposition. But it seems like the media, the political systems, all that, the economic systems are not at the moment structured to be able to facilitate that kind of recognition.
Right. What we can do is remember that we created those systems, and we can change those systems. If you look at the systems as a fait accompli, that's a done deal. How can I change it? You have to remember that you created it. We created the systems, and now we're saying that they are controlling us. Wait a minute, who created them? So we can uncreate them. We can create different systems. We can replace those systems. We can try to transform them, but in many cases they won't be transformable. They're too powerful. We have allowed them to become too powerful. So the best way, in fact, I'll go back to Bucky Fuller again. He said that if you have a system that won't change, the best thing to do is create a better system, then people will go to that system. So if we keep putting money and time and effort and energy into trying to change the system and it doesn't change, I'm going to take the government, for example, our federal government. Obama got elected, everybody was very excited. He's going to change the whole thing. Well, obviously that's not happening. So we put a lot of hopes after the election. A lot of people put a lot of hopes and dreams into what was going to happen after he came into office, and it's not happening the way we thought it was going to happen. I don't mean to say he hasn't done anything, but he's
right. The major change that was anticipated.
But we all got excited and thought something really big was going to happen. So we are investing those hopes and dreams, and if we keep getting our hopes and dreams dashed because this system doesn't work the way we think it should, or we make this change and that system doesn't work the way it should, we end up resorting to cynicism. And we get cynical.
Sure.
I call it, we go a slow death of cynicide. We get they say if you scratch a cynic, you'll find a disappointed idealist.
Okay.
And most of us have been idealists when we were young, and something happened, and we got our face slapped or our hand slapped, or we got really disappointed about something idealistic that we had in mind. And sometimes, now I haven't succumbed to this yet, but a lot of us have become cynical and going, oh, that won't work. Not skeptical. It's different than skepticism. Skepticism is healthy. Cynicism is just an absolute hopelessness about things.
You've used systems, the word systems, a lot, and in your book you talked about, there's a term that you use, systems thinking, which I wanted to ask you a little bit more about, because as I read the part of it in the book here, it kind of opened a whole other area of trying to look at, it's sort of like how things work, and then trying to understand. So if the systems that we are vested in at the moment are not functioning properly and we're looking to create new systems, then I would think that this systems thinking perspective is going to be important to be able to figure out how to facilitate a new one. Am I?
Yeah. A system is, was it Einstein said that we can't solve our problems at the same level of consciousness or thinking that we created them with.
Right.
Largely what we created most of our situations with is linear thinking, cause-effect thinking, linear. we have created such complex systems that they are no longer linear systems. They're complex systems. And there's relationships, there's time delays, there's cultures, there's attitudes, there's mechanics, there's physicalness to it, and they've gotten very complex. And the only way to really intervene with those systems in any kind of positive way is to have an understanding of how systems work. And that means studying general systems theory and systems dynamics. And there's a whole school of thought. It's a relatively new science. I'm guessing in the late 40s, mid 40s, so it's about 60 years old or so, something like that. But that's about the time our systems started getting very complicated too.
But it sounds like it's a whole body of knowledge.
It's a body of knowledge.
Is that something that if we're going to consciously mature the population, the species, do we need to individually understand that body of knowledge? More
people need to. I'm not saying everybody, that would be foolhardy, but I think it'd be great to teach systems thinking in schools, in elementary schools. So kids are not just left to their own devices to think how things work. They're just going to get their parents' input on it. Mm-hmm. But teach systems thinking, at least whet their appetite about it, so they see mm-hmm. that a system behaves differently than simply me moving this cup over here, and that's mm-hmm. the end of it. Mm-hmm. There's a whole series of things that happen as we go through systems and politics and so forth, and that's why we get the gridlock that we've got going now in Washington. It's just become so dysfunctional because nobody understands how to engage with it. Mm. Even when you have people that are well-intended, a good example or good evidence for a system being dysfunctional is when you have really good, well-meaning people go into that system with all kinds of high expectations for how they're going to perform, mm-hmm. and they get gobbled up. And they end up looking like they didn't mean it, they were insincere. Mm-hmm. I don't think all those people were insincere. I think they just got into something that was over their head, mm-hmm. and they don't know how to act it. What typically happens when you get into a system, when you get into the bowels of the system, mm-hmm. is unless you're forewarned about this and are very strong in your character and in your stand, you will start acting like the system wants you to. Mm. There was a couple of consultant friends of mine did a study of 500 managers and mm-hmm. leaders in organizations a few years ago. And they asked all these 500 managers, what were the attributes you most admire in leaders? Mm-hmm. And they gave them all these characteristics, most of which were the same. They said, which leaders do you admire most? And they were pretty much the same candidate, Winston Churchill and Gandhi and all the usual suspects. Then they asked them, how do you rate yourself relative to the qualities that you aspire to as a leader? And they all said, I failed. None of them, even though they know the aspiration, they know the qualities they want to have in their life, the people they model and admire in their life, they still weren't acting that way. They weren't going for those, they weren't fulfilling their own aspirations. Okay. And they asked them what they were doing, and they said, we are, not in these exact words, but they were basically saying, we conform to what the system, what the culture wants from us. Mm-hmm. We go along to get along. Right. So they are foregoing their aspirations. It's in an organization or a religion or an educational system or whatever. I don't know whether those systems, I don't know what the right term is here, but the way that things are, I don't know that happens consciously. Those things, I think maybe people do things, or they take a position and they never check back, or that it's sort of the assumptions are made and stuff happens without a plan, without a rational analysis and assessment of, is this the appropriate way to do this? Maybe it was 50 years ago, but maybe it's not today. And so am I right about this? Yeah. Nobody says, let's create a system. They say, I'm going to start a company, or we're going to start a neighborhood meeting, or we're going to start a family. Nobody says, I'm going to start a system. And what's our culture in the system? We're going to create a manifesto. We're going to create a constitution. They don't do that. They just start the business, or they start a community group, or they start a family. Mm-hmm. And what the system takes is the powerful person in that, the founder of the company, the head of the household, whatever. Their personality gets kind of at the core, kind of the DNA of it, and then the people that rally around. So in dysfunctional systems, for instance, let's say you have an alcoholic family, and more typically the husband is the alcoholic, the wife is the codependent, the kids learn how to stay invisible or do whatever they have to do to cope and get by, and they keep the secret from the neighbors and all that. That dysfunctional system develops, and nobody said this is your role and this is your role. You just fall into it. You just start doing it. Years ago, I saw a therapist showed me a video of a bunch of kids, little kids, and they had them role play. They're all from dysfunctional families, by the way, and they had them role play a family. And one person was the dad, and one little girl was the mother, and then 2 children, and they all asked them to just do this scene.
Right.
And I was in tears in 2 minutes watching these kids. These 5- and 6-year-old kids knew exactly what roles that they picked in this act-out thing. And they did it, I mean, they did it very well, but I was in tears myself. It was just touching. So these kids, the people, the parties, the actors in the system learn how to do it to get along. So if you have a dominant boss, a dominant founder of a company, and he hauls off and lambasts everybody or gives them a hard time, people will end up walking on eggshells around that person.
Right.
And you can have a whole culture that is devised by that personality, but then other things happen that nobody even knows why they happen.
Right.
That you referenced that story of the 5 apes, and that's in my book. I don't know if you want to read it. Or want me to read
Actually,
it?
I want to move on to something about business, because we're to make sure we cover some of this material, because a key component of your book is that while we're in these challenges, we've got these problems, the role of business in helping us evolve to that higher level is very pronounced. And from your perspective, it's actually critical. So I thought maybe we could talk about that a little bit, because I want to, the people that watch this show, most of them are going to be business owners. So we need to start thinking in a direction that's going to help facilitate this kind of maturation. Okay.
My mentor, Willis Harman, once wrote, way back before I even knew him, that his focus was to start focusing on business, because business was the locomotive driving the train of society. And in 1985 or so, that was very true then. But we have actually evolved into a corporatocracy right now. Businesses are running the show. They're running the world right now. Corporations are running the world, the big corporations. So if you have the most enlightened people in government, in education, in science, in religion, and they're all enlightened and everybody's up for transformation, if business doesn't go along with it, you're not going to get it through. Business is got control of the whole thing. We've allowed that to happen. It didn't happen because they're bad guys. We've allowed those systems to do that. And our corporate laws and the way we've structured our government in relation to corporations and campaign spending and finance, all that kind of stuff, they are running the show right now. So if they don't want something to happen, it's not going to happen. And we've seen that actually in play in the last few years, where certain companies have just put down the law, that's not going to happen, and they can stop it. If they can't stop it with their money directly, they can stop it by buying legislation. Legislators, or excuse me, lobbying for legislators. Right. We don't bribe here, we lobby. So, okay.
But it makes a lot of sense to me that the major corporations are the dominant influence. If I'm a small business owner, do I have an impact? Do we have to change the mechanics at the top level, or can we start at the lower level and have it cascade up?
The likelihood of change coming is far greater in the lower levels than it is at the higher levels, because they are more calcified, you might say. And most of what I know about going on in business, the people that are starting really incredible businesses with great values and concern about the environment and all that, are small, medium-sized companies that are just getting going. And there's probably as many people working for those companies as they are working for the multinationals. So if those numbers of people are comparable to the people employed by the multinationals, I don't mean worldwide, but at least in this country, there's a pretty good chance that we can make some pretty good change happen. But it's got to come from the business community. And when the large corporations start seeing that they're losing business, losing employees, losing brain power to these other organizations because they're doing things that are more environmentally friendly, that are more exciting, that are more socially conscious, that are more interconnected with people working together, more fun. They're going to start seeing, we better change or we're going to be history.
Sort of like the leader running around to the front of the pack and
You
saying,
got
look,
it.
they're following me now.
Yes. That's the leader's job. Hey, the crowd's going that way. I better hurry up and catch up with them. Get out in front.
Makes sense. So how does, I'm excited to hear that, because it means that my career has been involved with working with people in small and medium-sized enterprises. I've done, for over 30 years. And I see within those people that kind of passion, that the dreams, the desire to make things work, and some pig-headedness and all that sort of stuff that goes along with it. But I think that there's so many more of those kinds of businesses out there, and these guys, these men and women, tend to be thirsty for information and knowledge and looking for things to do. They don't come in because they haven't, for the most part, gone to Harvard Business School or any of that sort of thing, and therefore have this fixed idea as to how this is supposed to work. So they're looking for solutions, looking for ways to make this stuff happen. And so I think that there's a high probability that they could resonate, the message that you're talking about could resonate with those sort of people, which would be great, because then you start the process moving. So now, how does that take us to the great dream that you mentioned in your book? Could you define that for us?
The great dream is a vision I have for a world where everybody has their basic needs met, and that we are sustainable in terms of working the planet, so that we're not, the water level everything is sustainable, and everybody has their basic needs met. That doesn't mean it's a welfare society. It just means everybody has their basic needs met. Another way of explaining it is the mission of one of the publishers that I work with, A World That Works for All. That's their tagline for their publishing company. A nonprofit that I work with and give a lot of time to, their mission is to have a human presence on Earth that is so environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just. And that kind of sums it up. So there's lots of ways of defining what this great dream would be. But
that doesn't mean, my interpretation of the different phrasings that you've had there, that doesn't mean that you're not, the people aren't striving for excellence, for improvement, for new ideas, for,
no.
It just means that we're not trying to do so at the expense of others.
We're not exploit. Right now we have a system that exploits a lot of people, mostly in other countries, and they end up with the worst water, the worst environment, the worst living conditions, the least money, most disease, etc. And so we're actually getting rich off of their backs, and that is not a moral imperative as far as I can see. So if we could just assure that everybody in the world has, not everybody will want it or get it or reach it, but if everybody has it available to them.
The opportunity is
they have clean water to drink, they have a roof over their heads, and if they need medical attention, in a dire emergency, they can get it. I'm not saying Cadillac healthcare, but that they can have their basic needs met.
Maslow.
We could do that so easily. I mean, it would take so little to do that if we had the will. That's the question. It's not the ability to do it, but do we have the collective will to do it?
We don't have very much time left in the show, probably 3.5 minutes. So what I wanted to, how do we, what can, as individuals, how do we cause things to move in the direction of the great dream?
Well, one of the things I've learned, Dave, is that I have never been successfully able to change anybody. The only person I can change is me.
Right.
And if each person that hears this show or reads my book or whatever sees how they can actually start acting more maturely, more responsibly, more consciously in their life, and if they have kids or people that they influence, like employees or coworkers or whatever, they can be a voice for that. They're not going to convert anybody. Nobody's going to get converted. But if you happen to say something and someone, oh boy, I'm glad you said that. Now you're not converting them; you're resonating with them,
Right.
and they're identifying. They say, I have the same thoughts, and I haven't had the guts to say it. I'm glad you said it. Then you can start getting something going. But to go out there and try to convert people isn't going to happen.
You mentioned in your book there are things that you can stop doing, and things that people can do. I mean, if you've reached that point where, as an individual, myself or whomever says, yeah, this makes a lot of sense to me, I should do something, but what should I do? There's a couple of suggestions that you have.
Well, given that we have little time, rather than going into the listing, one of the things that we do, all of us do, is that we empower systems that are dysfunctional. We empower systems that actually we say we're against. So we will buy products when we say we are for environmental sustainability. We will act in ways that support the status quo rather than challenge the status quo to improve. And we all do that. So if we can just get more conscious, more aware of what we're doing every day, and look at our actions, what we drive, when we drive, how we drive, what we drive, how we shop. That's a big one because we do shop a lot. What we consume, how we relate to one another, how we relate to nature, all of those things, and see, and bust yourself. Call yourself out on it. If you see, I'm doing that, I don't want to do that anymore, and then stop doing that. Most of all that list in the book has to do with things like that.
You know what's interesting to me about that, and this is pretty much where we're going to have to very briefly end up, but it's being self-aware, and therefore making the decision to make a change when you recognize, maybe I'm doing this, maybe I could change. You don't have to beat yourself up. But if you recognize, I've been doing this type of thing, or I've been handling people in this way, and if I shifted it, it would have a different impact. That is a positive thing and moving in that direction. I'm going to ask if there's any last 10-second something that you want to tell the folks out there, John.
I just had one and it just left me. So sorry about that.
All right.
I had to get this in.
Well, we'll have to invite you back for another show, because this is fantastic, and I really appreciate your being here. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming and visiting us here on Reference Point. And remember, you can send questions or suggestions or whatever to me at info@referencetv.com. And if you have a question for John, I'll make sure it gets to him. And you can learn more about him in his book, Getting to a Better Future. Thank you for being there, and we'll see you next time on Reference Point.
Thank you.